Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to dive into a topic that's becoming more critical by the day, how digital health companies can meet the rising expectations around cybersecurity. As the healthcare landscape becomes increasingly digitized, the stakes are higher than ever. Patient data, clinical workflows, and sensitive business information are all potential targets, and the regulatory landscape continues to evolve in complexity. That's why we brought together two of the most respected voices in healthcare cybersecurity to share their insights and experience. Joining us today is Steve Cagle, CEO of Clearwater Security, a leader in healthcare-focused cybersecurity solutions, and Hal Porter, Director of Consulting Services at Clearwater Security, Digital Health, Health IT, and an expert in risk management and compliance strategy. Together, they'll help unpack what the new bar for cybersecurity looks like and what digital health innovators like you can stay ahead of. Let's get started. I'm Bethany Boschert, the show director of the Digital Health Hub Awards, and I'm excited to welcome you. This is my 4th year with the Digital Health Hub Foundation, and it's been amazing to watch how quickly the digital health space continues to evolve, especially in areas like AI and cybersecurity. At Digital Health Hub, we're here to celebrate the innovators shaping the future of healthcare. We're proud to partner with organizations like Clearwater, who not only support our mission, but bring deep expertise to critical challenges like data security. It's my pleasure to introduce someone who's been the driving force behind the Digital Health Hub Foundation since day one, Mark Goldstein. He's the founder and executive producer of the Digital Health Hub Foundation Awards and the visionary who helped launch this platform. Under Mark's leadership, the awards have grown into one of the most recognized honors in digital health, and none of this would be possible without his dedication, insight, and relentless energy. Please join me in welcoming Mark.
Thanks, Bethany. Look, we couldn't do anything that we do without sponsors like Clearwater. And Clearwater has stepped up here. They've got a lot of our companies that have applied for our awards this year. We have over 2,000 applied. A number of them are clients. They're very active. Cybersecurity is top of mind. When we asked Clearwater, how could you get involved with the awards program, we said one of the first things we wanted to do was introduce your services to our community. Again, our community is 2,000 companies strong. We've awarded some great companies over the last 7 years. We've got judges. We've got a whole thing. Everything's coming together with us at the HLTH show in Las Vegas on October 20th. And you're here to see Clearwater today, but I just wanted to say, thank you, Clearwater. We love you guys. We actually think your solution is kick-ass, and I think you're going to enjoy the next 30 minutes. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Clearwater.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Bethany, for the great introduction. Thank you to both of you also for your leadership and for everybody who's on the phone today for everything you're doing to help improve healthcare. It's tough work being an entrepreneur, and we appreciate what you do. I know it's difficult, and glad to speak to you today. Just wanted to start off by emphasizing why we're here today. We're here to talk about meeting rising cybersecurity expectations. So really, what do we mean by that? To set the stage, and we're going to go into much more detail, healthcare organizations have had more third-party breaches than any other industry, and most of those are coming, unfortunately, from digital health or health IT companies. And as a result of this, what we're seeing is your customers, right, those payers, those providers, are really starting to or have begun to put very stringent cybersecurity and risk management program requirements in place for their vendors. So, as a CEO, as a CTO, as a founder, HIPAA compliance and cybersecurity are really a business issue. And I commend all of you for being here today and taking your precious time to listen to what we have to say. We really hope this will be of value to you. We're bringing to you some insights that we have obtained from working with hundreds of digital health companies at various stages. We're very honored to have helped some of those companies really get to market and to be a leader in that marketplace. So this particular quote from Dr. Mela Palali really just speaks to some of the success that Care Health AI has had with showcasing their cybersecurity program and their HIPAA compliance program as a way to really transform cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance as something that could be an obstacle into selling and being successful to a provider or to a payer to really a competitive advantage. It's something that really distinguishes their commitment to cybersecurity, to protecting patient data, and most importantly, protecting patients. Let's face it, these technologies that we're developing and putting in place, which are really helping to improve healthcare and helping to make the lives of patients better, they also come with risk. And it's very important that we're addressing those risks, because we know that the providers especially are relying on these technologies to treat patients. It's a lot of responsibility. We have to make sure things are secure. So that's why we're here today. That's why it's so important. We're going to dive into that in the next slide. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce our company in a little bit more detail. So just so you know who Clearwater is, we are the largest pure play healthcare focused cybersecurity and compliance firm. We've been serving healthcare for over 16 years. We actually serve all parts of healthcare. We have dedicated teams in hospitals and health systems, in physician practice, but also, and very importantly, and you're going to hear from Hal today, Hal runs our digital health and health IT practice. It's a dedicated practice that we have at Clearwater. We feel that it is extremely important to understand the business of our clients and really to help be a part of their business plan. So the insights, again, we're going to bring to you really come from working with those clients, over 600 active clients across the industry. And we also have some good insights from those that you're going to market to. So we understand what their requirements are. We have a lot of experience on the HIPAA side as well as on cybersecurity. We're known by many who are lawyers, chief compliance officers, for our success rate when our clients have had inquiries or investigations with the Office for Civil Rights. 100% of the time, OCR has accepted Clearwater's deliverables. So we're very proud of that. Just to give you some confidence in our credibility. What do? We help smaller organizations, early stage organizations in particular, really establish their cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance program. As they grow, we help them scale that, so it's right size for where they are, but also where they want to go to. And we usually do that on an outsourced basis. We can help with anything from policies and procedures all the way through very technical advanced testing, monitoring, threat detection, incident response, really everything that you probably don't want to have to worry about yourself, but you want an experienced healthcare expert partner to be at your side as you're growing your business to help you move along. So that's about what I'll say about Clearwater for now. What we really want to talk about is some of the trends. This is really going to be mostly focused on what we're seeing out there and our recommendations on how to address it. On that topic, what we're really seeing in healthcare over the last several years, especially since the pandemic, is a very high number of ransomware attacks, in addition to other types of breaches in healthcare. And in fact, last year, there were over 277 million records reported to the Office for Civil Rights as being breached. Just think about that in terms of percentage of our population, right? It's a huge number. Of course, a big part of that was the Change Healthcare breach last year, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Ransomware is unfortunately driving a lot of the breaches that we're seeing in healthcare. According to a report by Sophos, 2/3 of healthcare organizations, they think of this as providers, said they experienced some type of ransomware attack, compared to 60% the year before. So big numbers, just getting bigger. The frequency of these attacks is growing, but also the sophistication is becoming much more impactful. In 2023, 50% of victims took longer than a week to recover, whereas just 1 year later, 79% of organizations took more than a week to recover. So the point here is these attacks can be extremely valuable on organizations. They can be very, very costly and difficult to recover from. And they're costing organizations millions of dollars in recovery. That also is not including things like reputational damage, impact to your clients, or potential contractual obligations that may be breached as a result of a ransomware attack, right? So these are things we really want to be able to avoid. Why is this happening? Why is healthcare so targeted, and why is it suffering so much from these types of attacks? Well, think about the attack surface, right? The growing footprint of technology that healthcare organizations have, again, for a very good reason, right? We're trying to solve a lot of problems with technology, but that creates a lot more points of access for a hacker to go after. There's much more data out there. It's being shared with more people. And EPHI, or electronic protected health information, it is the most valuable data out there. It is going to fetch the highest amount of a ransomware payment because it's so sensitive, or potentially if it's not available, it could impact the ability to treat patients. As a result of that, healthcare organizations are more likely to pay a ransom payment than any other type of industry, and that is only attracting more threat actors. We also find that these threat actors are evolving their techniques. As soon as we put in the next layer of controls, of course, they're using artificial intelligence or other types of tools and techniques to evade those controls. So we have to constantly be maturing our cybersecurity program to take into account the way that they're working. Healthcare historically, it's had weak cybersecurity. It's just the way it is. As we know, healthcare has been lagging in technology, no different in cybersecurity, right? So it makes it a little bit easier for these attackers to go after. And as we know, a lot of healthcare organizations have limited resources. They don't have the people, they don't have the experience. So all this is a bit of a perfect storm when you think about what's happening from a threat perspective. So really, how does all this affect all of you as vendors? And one of the key trends we have seen has been an increase in cyber attacks through the supply chain, particularly with healthcare technologies. As providers and payers have improved their own security programs, they've also adopted new technology. So they're reliant on third parties. And those third parties, of course, if they're not secure, that gives a bad actor a way to get to the provider or to the payer. It's a weak link, of course, in their security program. And cyber criminals know this. They know that it's often easier to breach the defenses of one of these APIs or technology partners, software as a service providers. And in addition to that, and this is very important, if they do that, they might actually be able to get to multiple organizations at once, right? Because multiple customers of that vendor are using that technology. So if you think about, as I mentioned before, Change Healthcare, which some of you are probably familiar with, back in February 2024, that was a ransomware attack that really rocked the entire healthcare sector. A threat actor was able to compromise a user's credentials. Change Healthcare did not have multi-factor authentication and other layers of defenses on a particular server that was accessible through the web. And as a result of that, the bad actor was able to deploy ransomware, and it was actually able to do that over many parts of the network. The Change was not able to contain this. They had to shut everything down, and 70% of providers were impacted. Claims and payments couldn't be processed, and it cost the industry billions of dollars. And on top of that, 190 million records were stolen, resulting in the largest breach in healthcare ever. So while this was clearly the most impactful attack, it's not a lone example. There's been other attacks, maybe not as big, but certainly impactful, where cyber criminals have been able to increase their focus on health tech companies. In case Change was, kind of paving the way for that. And we've seen attacks on EHR software, practice management software, data analytics companies. A few headlines are here, of course. And threat actors have gone very, very far to do some extremely terrible things in terms of how they're going to collect their money, including publishing images of breast cancer patients and later making good on their threat when the ransomware was not ransom payment was not paid. These types of attacks are real, and again, they're costing organizations millions of dollars. That one resulted in a $65 million settlement to the victims. As a result of all this, we're really seeing ransomware as a top threat to the supply chain, to digital health companies, and of course, to the providers and payers. The next slide just provides a few more statistics, again, on what we're seeing in third-party breaches. Again, I said before, healthcare experienced more third-party breaches than any other. It's about 41% of all third-party breaches, according to one report. And third-party breaches have, for many years, accounted for the lion's share of the volume of records that are breached. So it's actually, you're seeing more records breached through a third party. In fact, it was about 77% associated from a business associate in healthcare. And again, from a cost perspective, the healthcare industry is the most expensive industry to have a breach. The average cost of a breach is $7.4 million, according to the Ponemon Institute, which conducts an annual survey each year. And it should be noted that they only look at breaches up to about 113,000 records. So it is not the mega breaches we're talking about. These are the, unfortunately, the more typical breaches. And just another stat not in the slide, it costs healthcare organizations an average of $1.5 million a day from the loss of business when their operations are impacted. So again, you can imagine why here, you can see why your customers are going to be so focused on your security program, so focused on HIPAA compliance. It's really impactful. And then lastly, on the next slide, beyond the money, okay, at the end of the day, cybersecurity is patient safety. And there's been numerous studies that have shown that breaches, ransomware, they have had significant impact to outcomes of patients. They have created longer length of stay. They have increased complications for medical procedures. Of course, why has this happened? Well, if the data is not available, the patients in the hospital, especially in an acute setting, that patient may not get the same type of clinical decision, right? They can't get that clinical support from technology. They aren't able to process blood tests or other types of lab results or lab testing. And you have, of course, just a whole slowdown in terms of how you're handling patients. Some of them are leaving the facility. Certainly elective procedures are delayed, and some of those might be very important, especially for people with long-term conditions. So we know from the data, from published studies, from surveys, that in hospitals, when there's a ransomware attack, mortality rates increase anywhere from 20, not 20 to 35%, but in 20 to 35% of the hospitals that have had ransomware attacks, we've seen an increase in the mortality rate. So this is a life and death scenario, unfortunately, when information is not available or organizations cannot operate under normal conditions. So again, I wanted to leave you again with some of the reasons why this is so important, why we should be so focused on this, and why it's so important from to your customers. And with that, I'll hand it over here to Hal to talk a bit about really what do we do about it? You know, what are some approaches to addressing this for digital health and health IT companies?
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Really appreciate it. So what to expect? Steve has told you a little bit about what's going on with the larger healthcare ecosystem in terms of cyber attacks and threat actors. Now, obviously, that poses a significant threat to the businesses throughout the healthcare ecosystem. In particular, Steve just talked about those larger systems and how concerned they are around third-party risks. So what does that mean, and what are the implications for the organizations like yours in health IT and digital health? What you're going to see from customers and potential customers is an increase in expectations and scrutiny, particularly around, as Steve mentioned, your security and your HIPAA compliance programs. Two particular concerns for health IT and digital health companies are that there are cost issues that are in regards to establishing what we think is a reasonable and appropriate cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance program for your organizations. And there's oftentimes limited security expertise within health IT and digital health companies. Nevertheless, when an organization is going to be processing EPHI in some way, shape, or form on behalf of a provider or covered entity for HIPAA purposes in the healthcare sector, you're going to be required to sign a business associate agreement. It's required under the HIPAA. It's required under HIPAA that you do that, and you're going to contractually obligate yourself to comply with the HIPAA security rule as part of that and as part of the contractual process. So you're going to see an increase in expectations and scrutiny from cyber liability insurance providers as well. The more data that you take in, the bigger risk that you pose to them. As Steve mentioned, the average breach in healthcare is around 7.4 million. And that does not include those extremely large breaches, those, the Change Healthcares, which could be into the billions of dollars in damages. So there's that as well. And what you also need to be thinking about is in the form of managing your own risk perspective. So what we find oftentimes is that this creates a bit of a moral dilemma for many health IT and digital health companies, especially smaller organizations, where on the one hand, you have a security program in place. You have to have a security program in place in order to address client expectations. But on the other hand, you need to be generating enough revenue in order to fund the cybersecurity program itself. So what do you do when you're caught in this type of conundrum? What we encourage folks to do is to get out in front of the issue as opposed to trying to figure it out later. Because what's going to happen is You're going to engage with your potential client. You're going to start talking with them about your solution. You're going to get them very excited about the potential that your solution provides for them. Typically, maybe you're going to be talking to physicians or talking to the CIO within a large organization at that point. And they're going to be excited. You're going to be excited. You're going to be ready to go. And you think you've made that sale. And you start into that procurement process with that potential partner. And you're going to run into their vendor risk management program, their third-party risk management program. Well, what does that entail? It can be a number of different things. For example, what we often see is suddenly there's a security questionnaire that you need to respond to. And they're asking all sorts of questions about your organizational security practices, as well as specific security controls that are in place around your solution. These questionnaires can range anywhere from 100 to 300 questions or more. And what we're seeing now too is if your solution includes an AI component, there's going to be additional questions around that. For example, what is your overall AI strategy? How do you train and operate the AI components of your solution? How do you update your algorithm? How do you prevent privacy leakage? How do you test for accuracy and against data bias, as well as potentially other questions around the solution itself? And you have to be prepared to respond to those questions. So in addition to that, what many organizations do is they'll utilize a third-party risk vendor management organization to try to help understand the risk associated with your organization by conducting scans of your external-facing IT footprint. So they run scans, and there's companies like SiteLock and Black Kite, Security Scorecard. There's others out there, but these are the three most common that we see and run into. And basically, these organizations provide a passive scan of public IP addresses that are associated with your organization. So anything they pick up there, they report. And they're going to hit those public IPs to the extent that they find vulnerabilities at those IPs. They're then going to generate some form of report card or benchmarking, which gives them some insight into your potential customers, for your potential customers around the state of your cybersecurity program and the risk of doing business with you. Now, oftentimes what we'll see here is maybe you have a public-facing website out there and it's managed by a marketing company, and you don't really pay too much attention to it because it's more of a static website. You're not really doing business through that website. Maybe your customers are accessing your solution through a cloud platform or some other area or portal, but the website itself is not the single point of entry for them. Well, we end up seeing that the website is not being maintained well, and it ends up having a lot of vulnerabilities in it. Well, that gets picked up by these scanning tools. They start to field questions. You'll end up starting to field questions like, well, do you really care about the security of your website? And how should we read that in terms of how you take care of security or how you look at security generally? And they could potentially infer that you don't have security around your solution because of that. And you end up being left having to explain that. So, these things, whether it's not being able to answer the questions in the security questionnaire or coming up with high risk from these security scanning tools, all of these things can stop that procurement process dead in its tracks until you sufficiently address these questions. So that's the situation where you don't want to ideally find yourself as an organization when you're trying to complete that sale. What are they trying to figure out through these questionnaires and through these scans? Well, they're trying to understand a number of things. First, they're trying to understand how mature your security program is or your security practices are, because they're trying to make a determination as to the risk to their organization that comes through doing business or conducting business with you. So they're going to be looking at a number of different things. One of those things is the volume of their information that will be processed by you or that you may have or hold. They're going to look at the security controls that are in place. They're going to look at the criticality of the solution that you're offering to them, to their business, to their overall business processes and against their overall business processes. Now, in order to determine the maturity of your program, they're going to look for indicators of maturity. That might be the answers to those control questions. It might be the results of those scans and a combination of both. They're going to look for you to sign what's called a business associate agreement or a BAA, where you contractually obligate yourself to a security probe and to the HIPAA security rule requirements. They're going to be looking for things like, are you doing regular vulnerability scanning? Are you patching your systems? Some of that will show up through the passive scans, but some they are going to try to gain through the questionnaires as well. They're going to start asking questions around other practices that you're following. Now, I mentioned a bit of a moral dilemma earlier because there's going to be a lot of pressure to tell people what they want to hear in order to get that sale through so that we can start generating that revenue. And we need to be very cautious about that. We want to be very accurate in our response to these types of security questionnaires, and we don't want to exaggerate what we're doing or potentially misrepresent. So what they're trying to do is understand the risk to their organization and what is the value that your solutions are going to bring to them, and what is the risk that it poses to them. So they're going to be looking at the information that they're collecting from you and trying to make that determination. A lot of this is going to depend on the nature of your solution. If it's some sort of software as a service or SaaS type of solution where you're ingesting patient information and maybe giving some sort of output as a result of that, they're going to want to understand that information flow. The security controls that are around that, whether or not they're engaged in standard security practices or have evidence of standard security practices that they would expect to see at an organization like yours. They're going to be looking for things like, where does this data reside? Is it onshore? Is it offshore? They're going to look at your ability to respond to the questionnaire. They're going to look for any indicators that the information that you're providing may or may not exactly represent what your actual cybersecurity program is. So those are the kinds of things that they're looking for in order to understand the risk that doing business with you poses to their larger organization. They're going to want to understand things like your ability to respond and recover if you do have an incident. Regardless of how sophisticated your cybersecurity program is, and regardless of how much you spend on that cybersecurity program, you can never reduce the risk to zero. There's always going to be a risk that you're going to have a threat actor that's able to gain access into your systems. So they're going to want to understand how well positioned you will be to respond to those types of attacks. Are you going to be able to stop that attack quickly before they're able to steal any of that information, like Steve talked about, or whether or not you can prevent them from implementing a ransomware payload? Again, as Steve mentioned previously, are you going to be able to catch that? Do you have a high or low likelihood of catching that? They're going to try to determine that. They're going to be evaluating these kinds of things. Also, you're likely to be asked to sign some sort of service level agreement. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you have the practices in place from an incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery perspective to actually meet those service level agreements in your solution and that you signed for? Just this past June, as an example, a provider of a very highly specialized and specific service experienced a 14-hour platform-wide outage. Unfortunately, one of our customers who relies on that platform suffered the loss of several of their customers and millions of dollars in revenue, and spent weeks scrambling to repair the damage to their reputation as a reliable provider, all because they weren't able to meet their defined and agreed upon service level agreement, wholly due to their complete reliance on a third party without taking some time to identify an alternate source or alternate pathways to ensure that their business continuity, that there is business continuity for them in the event of an incident or a disaster. So these are the kinds of questions that they're going to be asking and looking at you to try to understand where you are as an organization. So that's what your clients are going to be trying to understand. So what do you do about that? What should we do about this? And so that we're in a position to respond appropriately to the security questionnaire, so that if someone runs this security scorecard scan on our domains, that we come out looking good through that. Well, there's a number of things that we typically recommend. And again, you often hear Steve or me talk about a reasonable and appropriate cybersecurity program. And that language actually comes from HIPAA. Under HIPAA, an organization is obligated to implement a reasonable and appropriate cybersecurity program that's going to manage the risk of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the electronic protected health information that it processes. So that's what you're trying to do. Now, what's reasonable and appropriate? Well, unfortunately, the answer is basically it depends. And it depends on a lot on the nature of your organization. Up until a couple of years ago, it was really difficult for us as an organization to point to anything that had some authority to it, that talked about or what seemed to lay out what would be reasonable and appropriate. Thankfully, that changed a couple of years ago with the creation of the 405D Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices. So this came out as part of the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, section 405D. And then in 2017, HHS convened the 405D task group, which leveraged the healthcare and public health sector, critical infrastructure, security and resilience, public-private partnership, that's a mouthful, which was comprised of over 150 members that represented numerous areas and roles that included cybersecurity, privacy, healthcare practitioners, health IT organizations, digital health organizations, as well as other subject matter experts. This task group then created the 405D practices. And what we really like about those is that it looked at not just the practices that the organization should have in place to protect against the top 5 threats to EPHI, but it also considered the size and nature of those organizations. So there are different practices, for example, for a small physician's practice than there are for a large integrated delivery network. There's also different practices that are recommended for a health IT digital health company than there are for a large payer organization. And so that's a really good place to go to start. And for us as a health IT digital health company, for example, what are the practices that we should have in place that would be indicative of having a reasonable and appropriate cybersecurity program for us as an organization and organizations like us? So we really like that. I also mentioned the HIPAA security rule a couple of times here as a business associate. We're required to comply with all of the requirements of the HIPAA security rule, whether we do business with a client or we're going to be processing PHI on their behalf. We're going to be required to sign a business associate agreement, which contractually obligates us to comply with the HIPAA security rule. So all of these things are things that we need to do at a minimum to be in compliance with the law and with that contract. Another standard that organizations will often look to define a cybersecurity program for themselves within is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or NIST CSF. Now, we recommend the NIST CSF, which is a framework of security objectives, as one of those recognized security practices. I mentioned 405D as a recognized security practice. And the reason that we point to these two specifically is that under the amendment to the HITECH Act that occurred a couple of years ago, it gives benefits to organizations who can demonstrate that they've adopted recognized security practices for purposes of investigation and potential fines and penalties by the Office for Civil Rights, or the enforcement arm of HIPAA. So if you have a problem and you do have a breach, if there's an exposure of EPHI and the regulator comes in, the Office for Civil Rights comes in, and they look at your cybersecurity program, they're considering several different possibilities of whether to audit you, whether they're considering looking for fines and penalties or entering into a settlement agreement with you for violations of HIPAA. Whatever that is, if you're able to successfully demonstrate as an organization that you've adopted either the NIST cybersecurity framework or the 405D health industry cybersecurity practices, often called 405D HICCUP, if you can demonstrate that you've had those in place for the 12 months or 1 year preceding the incident that led to the audit or fines or penalties, they're supposed to go easier on you. So there's an additional benefit potentially to organizations that use these practices as a foundation for their cybersecurity programs. One of the other things that oftentimes organizations like yours will run into is that you'll have customers that will start asking you, do you have a high trust certification or a SOC 2 certification? The reason that they're asking you for those is because in both those circumstances, that's a third-party certification. If I just send you a questionnaire, I'm really relying exclusively on what you tell me as an organization, right? And I'm relying on it as the truth and factual. So I have to trust that those answers are accurate and complete. The security scorecard, the Black Kite, the SiteLock, those are third party as well, but they really only are looking from the outside in. They can't really see some of those practices that you need to have in place as an organization in order to be HIPAA compliant and to fully address the risks associated with cybersecurity. There are limitations to those things that they can tell you. So oftentimes what they like to do is they like to see something like a high trust certification or a SOC 2 audit that gives them that additional trust that the controls are in place and that they're functioning as intended to minimize the risk to your organization and to theirs. Now, the issue with these certifications for organizations, particularly with the smaller, maybe early stage or smaller digital health and health IT organizations, is that there are costs involved and associated with them. The SOC 2 isn't typically quite as bad. It depends on the scope of that. And similarly with high trust, it really depends on the scope of the certification. One of the important distinctions, and oftentimes people don't really understand, is that HIPAA is a requirement of the organization. Only organizations can be compliant with HIPAA, not solutions. But when we talk about high trust or SOC 2, we can limit the scope of those to a specific solution. So if you have your solution that you're bringing to market or have on the marketplace, and you can draw a line around that in terms of what's in scope for the high trust certification or SOC 2 audit, and limit the scope of those things. So one of those things that an organization like you are providing for your SOC 2 or audit or high trust certification will look at is, okay, they have a SOC 2 audit, but does that include the scope of the solution that we're offering? And they're going to ask that question. So I'll give you an example of something that often happens. A lot of times organizations like yours will build their solution in the cloud, and they may go with AWS, or they're going to use Azure to build their solutions. And so they go to the cloud, they start building their solution in the cloud based on those, on those platforms. And then you go to the customer, and the customer says, well, do you have a SOC 2 audit? And your organization is like, absolutely, we do. And you provide the SOC 2 audit of AWS or Azure, where you really should be providing a SOC 2 or high trust based on what they've done. And while it's great to have that from the provider, it really only shows what you've built upon. It doesn't really cover anything that you've built on top of that and what's in your actual solution. So that ends up being not within scope of either the SOC 2 or the high trust, and they're going to identify that. These vendors, they're going to see that because they look at these things all the time, and they won't be fooled by it. So you need to be very careful in how you represent what you have to potential customers. You need to have a security program in place. You need to have those controls in place so that you're able to pass these certifications when you're ready to get them. And again, there's a cost associated with them. Unfortunately, it's not a one-time cost because they do run out and expire. There are different levels, for example, of high trust. So there's the E1 and the I1 that last a year. And then the highest level, R2, can last 2 years, but does require an interim year assessment. Similarly with SOC 2, they typically only last a certain period of time. We normally see 1 year, whereas we've seen some at 6 months. But once you get on that train, you really need to stay on that train and continue to update those certifications as time goes on. For SOC 2, you may be looking at potentially a smaller scope of cost around maybe $20,000 or $30,000. For high trust, the lowest level, the E1, can kind of fall into that range as well to get started with, but they do end up getting more costly. One, as you move up the levels from either E1 to I1 to R2, but also if you're expanding the number of assessed controls within those different levels. So, for example, if you're looking at doing a high trust R2 and you are evaluating against a cybersecurity framework. So for example, you select NIST and then you check off the box for HIPAA. Well, those are additional controls that have to be added in to that assessment. And so the number of controls continue to grow, and that drives the cost of that as well. So when an organization goes down the path of getting a SOC 2 or getting a high trust certification, typically what we'll talk with organization about is, look, if you're early on in this, the first thing that you're going to need to do before this is even an issue for you is to establish a cybersecurity program, getting those controls in place. Then what we would say to them is, it's a business decision. in the business decision, it's based on what you're hearing from your customers. When I start to hear a lot of my customers asking, do you have a high trust? Do you have a SOC 2? And you think that that's going to facilitate additional sales to justify the cost of those certifications or of that certification, well, that's when you want to start thinking about pulling the trigger on those, one of those. The certifications themselves, definitely want to point out, they do not make you secure. You need to have the security in place in order to get those certifications. And oftentimes some people get a little bit confused about that. And it's an important distinction, I think. While you might not be able to skip steps, while you might be able to skip some steps with customers' internal review processes when having one or more of these certifications. So for example, if you're working with a potential customer and they say, oh, you've got R2, that's great. You don't have to do our security questionnaire. Well, that's great. Sometimes that will happen. The challenge that we find now in the space here is that there's no uniform or standardized questionnaire. There's no uniform or standardized process. So every organization that you deal with is probably going to have a slightly different process, a slightly different questionnaire. So, the one that may say, okay, great, you've got high trust, you don't have to do the questionnaire and we're ready to go. But then another one may say, oh, well, we still require you to answer additional questions. For example, they may say, okay, well, you don't have to answer the technical questions or the questions around your solution, but we still have these questions about your organization and your compliance with HIPAA. For example, do you have policies and procedures in place that map to HIPAA? Do you have training in place for your folks within your organization in regard to HIPAA and HIPAA compliance? Do you have security awareness training? So these types of questions are more organizational, or what we would call foundational type of questions versus the solution. And so you will find, that there's some organizations that will ask for additional clarity and additional information about that. If you have specific types of controls that they're looking for, they may ask you questions around that. So if they want to know if you have multi-factor authentication or single sign-on or data encryption in place, protecting the data that might be specific to the solution that you're selling, very specific and targeted questions, they're going to be asking you that as well, on top of, accepting those certifications. So what are the things that, as I mentioned, even get to the point where you can get those certifications? Well, the first thing, you have to have a cybersecurity program in place. One of the first places that we usually begin is establishing some form of governance. So what does that mean? Well, we want to make sure that there is a visibility from the board level down as to the extent of the cybersecurity program. From the board level or leadership level, they should be making a determination as to the risk appetite and risk tolerance of the organization. Why is that important? Because there's almost always a limit on the resources that we have available for security. And understanding how much of those resources that we want to expend on security program is informed by how much risk that we're willing to take as an organization. How much risk we're willing to take depends on the number of different things. First of all, our financial status, also what our investors might think about it. It has to do with the expectations of our clients. So there's a number of factors that go into thinking about risk tolerance for the organization, and these types of questions, really should be occurring at the board leadership level within the organization. You don't want someone that is not at that level making those types of determinations for the organization, where their decisions may end up costing the organization millions and millions of dollars. So we usually start by setting some level of governance. The next thing that you're going to absolutely have to do is a risk assessment and risk analysis. A risk analysis within healthcare is a very specific thing required under the HIPAA security rule. It's best described by the guidance that was put out by the Office for Civil Rights about 10 or 11 years ago now. For a risk analysis, you need to ensure the scope of that analysis includes all of the systems and associated components used to create, receive, maintain, or transmit electronic protected health information within your organization. You need to document all of those systems and components. So if you have backup storage and developers who are using laptops and they're accessing EPHI in that way, maybe you have desktops and cloud infrastructure that also do that. You've got servers, all of those kinds of things have to be documented. And once you document all of those things, you then need to look at all the potential threats and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the PHI. You also need to assess all of the security measures and the security controls that are in place to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information. Then you need to determine the likelihood of any threat exploiting a vulnerability, given the controls that are in place, and the impact to the organization should that occur. All of that has to be documented, and all of it has to be available in the event that you would be audited by the Office for Civil Rights. So it's very, very important to your risk analysis. And unfortunately, it continues to be an area where many organizations are simply not compliant with. The Office for Civil Rights currently has a risk analysis initiative underway to specifically target organizations that haven't met this requirement. It came up during the audit program that they previously did, and it comes up over and over again when they're putting fines and penalties on organizations. So it's absolutely critical, and it's a compliance requirement. And it's also critical for your organization because we want to put those security controls in place so that you benefit from them. But we want to understand, even after we've done that, we want the risk to the organization to understand what that risk is. And so that we can make better, more informed decisions around what, if any, additional controls we may need to put in place. What, if any, additional spending needs to occur on the security program in order to better manage the risk to the organization. So from a technical testing perspective, there's requirements under the HIPAA security rule for technical evaluation, but it's also just simply good security practices as well, particularly for developing technology solutions. So on the one hand, we want to look at this more broadly. There can be internal and external vulnerability scans. We should be doing that on an ongoing and regular cadence and basis. There are internal and external penetration testing. This is when we have someone who's a hacker that's trying to gain access, whether that's from an external source trying to get into your systems, or if we make the assumption that they've already gotten in, how can they move around within your network? What can they access when they're in? We see phishing, social engineering. There's so much bang for the buck for these hackers, and so this kind of thing, social engineering training, phishing training, it's well worth its money to help potentially avoid that. What our technical testing and our hackers would typically tell us is that if you want to get into your organization or get into someone's organization, they're going to be able to get in, and typically how they're going to get in, unfortunately, is by phishing someone within your organization. They're sending an email, a very compelling email that tricks someone within the organization to click on a link that's embedded within it. Once that happens, they're going to be downloading software that they're unaware of, and now the hacker has potentially has access to your systems. If you don't have the controls in place to catch that immediately at the endpoint, they're going to be able to gain access to your broader systems. So these kinds of things are becoming essentially table stakes in the game of cybersecurity. Now, if you're building a technology solution, for example, a software as a solution or SaaS solution, and you're offering some sort of technology product in the marketplace, then you need to start thinking about how we're incorporating security into the product development. So building security into the system development lifecycle, conducting things like static application security testing, dynamic application security testing, so that you can identify and find vulnerabilities that exist within the code itself. Doing web application testing to understand whether there are misconfigurations within them that can be exploited by threat actors. All of those types of things are things that need to be occurring now. Oftentimes, what we'll see is organizations who don't do this initially. They've been developing their solution and getting it out to market as quickly as they can, and then they discover they have a problem, and they try to go back and fix it. This approach is much more expensive to try to go back and fix than it is to simply do it during the development process. One example is we had a client where their solution relied on a specific technology, which was designed to expedite development. It was a great product, and they loved using it. Unfortunately, it was later identified that it was not capable of being certified HIPAA compliant or being a component of a HIPAA compliance program because it wasn't covered under the business associate agreement from the provider, and was actually specifically excluded. This could have been identified early during the development process, had the security been an integral part of their development methodology. But unfortunately, instead, it delayed the release of their product by months because they had to go back to the drawing board for that specific component and redesign a major functional element of their solution before they could ensure that it was going to meet HIPAA compliance when they moved forward with production. So this kind of scenario can potentially be avoided if you're building security in the development lifecycle from the start. One of the things that you're going to need to do is monitor your environment. So as I mentioned, regardless of what we do, there's always that risk, there's always that possibility that attacker is going to be able to launch a successful attack and gain access into your organization. What we want to be able to do is to identify that as soon as possible. So one thing that we can do is look for vulnerabilities that exist within our IT footprint on an ongoing basis. So doing those vulnerability scans, looking for the opportunity to patch vulnerabilities and reduce the risk as frequently and regularly as possible, that's critical for any organization. Managing your firewalls and cloud security configurations, ensuring that they are correct, and ensuring that they're optimized and hardened. Those kinds of things are critical as well. Endpoint detection and response software, all of these things combined reduce the risk of a threat actor getting into your environment and also allowing you to respond more quickly when they do, potentially get in. So ultimately, we want to be resilient enough to withstand and recover from an incident. Be able to minimize the impact if a threat actor is able to gain access. And we're going to minimize the impact on the organization. We're going to catch them sooner rather than later, catch them within minutes instead of months, which is scary how many times that actually has happened. And then being able to effectively and decisively respond to that incident. That's what we're trying to do, and that's what we can do through a robust and tested incident response, business continuity, and disaster recovery plan.
Hal, I've got a question for you. Put
Sure.
you on the spot really quickly if we've got time for one. Just, you covered a lot today, from your experience actually helping health IT, digital health companies doing all this. A lot of times we're starting from the very early stage. How do you work with a company? How do we work with a company as Clearwater to not overwhelm them, but really just to be making sure we're focusing on, on the right things depending on where they are.
Absolutely. It's a great question, Steve. I lead a team of very seasoned and experienced CISOs, but also not only that, the whole consulting organization within Clearwater is a very, very deep bench with a lot of fantastic expertise that we can reach into. And so, as a vCISO, for our clients, we bring all of that to the table. So that way they don't have to worry about that. They, as I mentioned in the presentation, a lot of times they don't have that security expertise, and that's what we bring to the table. And we have those resources that we can pull in at any time to help basically across any of those areas of concern.
What I'd like to leave, just final thoughts here, if there's no questions, is we have, as you can tell, we do a lot of education, a lot of webinars and podcasts. We have a monthly cyber briefing as well, which I host the first Thursday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and it's a free registration. If you register once, you'll get the invite for every month. It's always recorded. We cover the top trends we're seeing over the last 30 days, so it's always very updated, and just a lot of really good information about what's happening in healthcare, specific cybersecurity. And then we always have a focus, speaker or client or somebody coming on board to talk about their situation. So it's really evolved to be a great community. And we invite everybody here to go to our website to register for that. And just, in terms of how we're working with our clients, why do clients work with us? It's really, I think, as you hopefully saw today, we understand your business. We understand digital health and health IT. This is what we do every single day. The people that work for Clearwater are extremely passionate about what we do. We're passionate about healthcare. We come to work every day really to help our clients be successful. That is our number one value out of our values as a company. And I think when we are working with clients, especially in this part of healthcare, we're very practical in how we approach the program. And so usually over a multi-year program, we can't do all this overnight. It's not realistic. We realize you're running a business, and The idea is to take these things off your plate, not put more things on your plate. So I think that's when we talk to clients, when they're talking to generalists or they're talking to other cybersecurity folks that really don't specialize, they can see the difference. And again, at the end of the day, our goal is to help you be successful as a company. It's not just about checking boxes for compliance. It's about protecting your organization, but also giving you that competitive advantage and really helping you just to accelerate your commercial plan. So that's what we bring to the table. We'd certainly love to hear from you. If you're going to be in Las Vegas in a few weeks, we hope to have a chance to meet in person, get to know you, establish a relationship, whether it's now or a year from now or several years from now. We're happy to just get to know each other and engage in whatever way we can until you're hopefully at some point ready to be a client. But thank you so much. I want to thank you again, Bethany and Mark, for having us today.
Yeah, and I'm just going to close out. We picked you guys and we're excited about you guys because you specialize in digital health and work with digital health companies. That's our community, and you're talking to our community. So look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas. This was great. Thanks, Team Clearwater. This is great.
Yeah. Thank you both. And just a reminder, we will announce winners of the Digital Health Awards all day Monday on 10/20 across 4 different stages, and we will have that schedule up soon. And thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Mark.
And wear your Clearwater
our
hat.
swag.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Well,
All right.
bye-bye.